let's move on within the issue of Schar Shabbat, the question of are you allowed to earn money for doing mitzvot? So it's not so clear. Looking for the page 10, middle of page 10. So there are a few sources that aren't so clear about this. One we saw already, so you don't, earning from these things will not give you bracha. One of them is Schar Meturgemanim, who specifically worked on Shabbat, right? They were the loudspeakers, the Rav's loudspeakers, right? Rav would speak and the Meturgeman would yell out to the 400 people, and he's making sure the 400 people in the shul or whatever, right, in the Beit Midrash would be able to hear the Torah. So l'chora, that's a mitzvah, and yet, wow, is there a Schar Shabbat problem there or not, based on this Gemara? What do you think? Right. Say better. You're right. But say more. We'll get to that. We're going there. No, you're asking good questions, but look, the mohel usually he'll do a visit before and after Shabbat. Oh, I think I thought it was the general question should be. Yeah, no. So I'm saying, right, yeah, we're gonna get to all those. Don't worry. Just saying, just from based on this Gemara. Right. So there are two aspects. One is it doesn't say it's usur. It says that there won't be a bracha. Number two, it doesn't even say it's Schar Shabbat. It says Mirzlik is Schar Shabbat, which I mean those two go together, right? If it was Schar Shabbat, it would be usur. But it doesn't say it's Schar Shabbat. It says it's Mirzlik is Schar Shabbat, and therefore Shabbat there's no bracha. So what is this? It seems to indicate that because he's working on Shabbat, it's not really Schar Shabbat, but he won't have a bracha. Because it's a mitzvah, it's not really Schar Shabbat, but there's a bracha. But there isn't a bracha, sorry, right? So this sounds like you could matir doing a mitzvah and earning based on the mitzvah on Shabbat, but don't expect the compensation to really help you much, right? That's what the Gemara seems to say. Okay, let's go. The next Gemara, Tinokot, the Gemara Nedarim. Tinokot lo korin b'tchila b'Shabbat. And part of the issue there is earning based on teaching the children on Shabbat. So you teach kids Torah on Shabbat. Are you allowed to make that money on Shabbat? And the Gemara says, Aikas chal shimud Shabbat. And he says, but you're allowed behavla'ah. Now, why do you need havla'ah? If you say that once you're doing a mitzvah, you're teaching kids Torah. If you say that to teach kids that you need havla'ah, you need to subsume that earning into in the monthly wage or whatever it is, that seems to imply that you're not to make money off that mitzvah. Oh, right. So Yaakov's pointing out the truth is that there's a bigger problem because really you're not allowed to earn money from teaching Torah anyway. Right? The Gemara asks this and says, how are you allowed to write Moshe? What's the lashon there? I'm trying to remember the pasuk. Is that the pasuk? The point is, we learned that you're not allowed to, that Moshe Rabbeinu says, just like I'm not allowed to earn from my teaching you Torah, so too, you're not allowed to earn from your teaching Torah. So how do we get paid for teaching Torah? The answer is because we're babysitting, right? That's what your wives all told me, that I'm being paid to babysit you guys. Just say that. So the havla'ah here is needed for other reasons because we're not really getting paid for the Torah teaching anyway, right? You're being paid for the the whole world is going to watch the YouTube and hear the people talking on the phone on the stairs. So this Gemara is a bit of a problem anyway. Close it from the wrong side. Another very interesting aspect is the Tosefta we started with. The Tosefta we started with at the bottom of page 10. I brought it again. הסוחר את הפועל לשמר לו את הפרה לשמר לו את התינוק. How do you read this braita? What does it say here? הסוחר את הפועל, לשמר לו את הפרה ולשמר לו את התינוק. What is this guy doing? What are you being hired to do? So watching or babysitting or watching livestock, right? Is this a normal way to say that we're watching livestock?
I think it's a different kind of guard because when you're watching the babies, you're watching the you don't get lots of witnesses.
Probably.
You want to the thought that this is more guarding. I don't know if this is tending as much as it's guarding.
What's the weirdest word in the Braita? Let's ask it like that. No, that's a halacha. No, I'm saying the weirdest the description of the case. I mean, the weirdest word in the description of the case.
The word low.
Sorry?
The word low. הסוחר את הפועל לשמור על הפרה. But לשמור לו את הפרה.
Interesting. Okay, I thought the word hapara. No? Yeah, that you cheated and looked at the Rashi. You're cheating and looking at the Rashi. No, hapara, it's a weird word, no? It's not, I don't recall, in all of Hilchot Shomrim, in all of Metzia, it doesn't mention watching a para. This is brighter, there's the famous sugi of Shalosh Parot, but to watch a single para, it's strange. It's strange. It's so strange that Rashi understands that it can't be that the Torah just told you to watch a cow for me. First of all, as Yonatan said before, cows come in flocks. Like you watch the whole pen. You're not going to watch a single cow, right? So Rashi says, therefore, lishmot hapara must be the paraduma. Otherwise, why are you giving someone the single cow to watch, right? It's just weird. And therefore, when it says tinokot, what are we talking about? L'shemer tinok. What tinok is this? What? A herd of tinokot. A herd. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Correct. Yeah. No, it sounds weird to me too. Right. A herd. Correct. Thank you. Very good. So l'shemer the kids from Corona. So Rashi says you have to l'shemer the kids, the children that they used to do all the work with the paraduma. They'd make sure that the kids will never be tameh. So you'd have them live in very interesting ways. I'm not going to go through all the details here, but the children were kept separate, right? That's why kids don't daven in the shuls these days, right? They stay outside, so they don't. No, I'm joking. So it seems that the shomer we're talking about is someone who's doing something pretty mitzvahdik, no? Without this guy, we won't have paraduma. We won't have the children ready for the paraduma. Sorry? I think it's not talking to me. Now, you can always argue this, the Chshar mitzvah is not the mitzvah itself. Fair enough. But still, I just wanted to show that the Braito, the Gemaras aren't very clear about whether you're allowed to earn money from doing mitzvot or not. So, obviously, it becomes a machloket Rishonim. Say the Rishonim over here, page 11. It says the Mordechai brings the machloket, Pasak Rabbeinu Baruch, Mikan, יש לי חשש על החזנים שמזכירים אותם להתפלל בשבת. So I'm not quite sure, right? He's talking about the Gemara in Kesubos again, right? Everything goes back to Ketubot. Everything goes back to the fight there, the Ketubah. Rabbeinu Baruch says, I'm not sure that a chazan is allowed to earn money for being a chazan on Shabbos. Rabbeinu Shmuel Bni Omer, de'en isur, don't sachar lekayem mitzvah להתפלל. This is a very interesting way of phrasing it. You're giving them the money for the mitzvah. I just want to point out, it's not like I'd say, right, the way I'd phrase it would be more broadly, ein isur schar Shabbat, schar Shabbat al mitzvah, I don't know, like I'm just trying to think, it sounds a bit strange, right? Not necessarily, notenu schar lekayem mitzvah leitpalel. Right? It could just be, because you're doing a mitzvah, so it's allowed, right? So that's the machloket here. The Rabbeinu Baruch says that you're not allowed. Rabbeinu Shmuel says you are allowed. And the Tur discusses this idea. It says, "B'sfarad boruchim on a mitzvah, עד שצריכים לזכור אחד מן השוק לתקוע להם. They had trouble, in Spain, they had trouble finding people to blow shofar for them. So they'd hire someone because otherwise it's just hard to find people. Where does this come from, this idea that you're allowed to pay someone to do mitzvah, to blow shofar? כי נראה לי שעשו, כדתניא, אסורות פה לשמור את הפרה והתינוק, etc. עלמא בהדיא קטני שאסור ליטול שכר שבת, אלא על ידי הבלעה. So we see they're doing a mitzvah, not doing a mitzvah. It doesn't matter. If you're watching the paraduma, you're also doing a mitzvah. And yet, says the Gemara, says the Tosefta, you have to subsume that money in something else, right? So on the one hand, it sounds like the case by the paraduma I said. You can argue that the hechsher mitzvah is not the mitzvah itself, all right? Right, but it's the actual mitzvah, maybe we're better off. In the first case, sorry, the Mitzvah Gamanim, thank you. The Mitzvah Gamanim, there too, a person is working on Shabbos. Shabbat, that becomes a mitzvah, not so clear, right? So how do we cope with how do we work all these things out, and what's the justification to matir? So I want to present three possibilities of how we're matir sachar, receiving sachar from mitzvot. I'm going to start from the end. I'm going to jump over to page 12, and then go back to page 11, and then mention from the Harchavot. Sorry, in that order. So the Taz in page 12, Rabbeinu Shmuel, right? Rabbeinu Shmuel, who said you're allowed to get money for mitzvot. Shani mitzvah tluya b'Shabbat atzmo ben shaycha limot achol כגון התפילות של שבת. וכן משמע ששכר תורגמן שהיו רגילים לתרגמן בשבת, אין בו סימן ברכה, משמע אבל איסור ליקה. So the Taz says, well, I could learn one thing from the Turgaman. When did the Turgaman work? Only ever on Shabbat, right? During the week, people weren't around. You didn't have Shiurim during the week. You had a handful of people who come to the Beit Midrash. You don't need someone to shout to shout out the Shiur, right? It only ever happened on Shabbat. So work that could only be done on, a mitzvah that's only relevant to be done on Shabbat, you could get paid for the schar mitzvah. If you could do it during the week, if it's relevant to do it during the week, it's asur. And Yaakov is making a face because he's saying this sounds
historical accuracy. I guess it was just in Europe that the rabbi typically just gave a dress twice a year on Shabbat. And, we do it all the time, but, it seemed that it was only
yes,
twice a year. So,
yes.
But here the Shabbat was...
right. No, but by the Tanaim, we're going to see that even more strongly next unit. Next unit is going to be even more extreme in that historical context. They're going to go through the history. We're going to go through the history then, at least the history of the Tanaim and the Morenu. But yeah, I wonder what really happened and changed.
Why in Europe, right, that we lost that of all the things to lose.
Right.
That was,
it is interesting. It is interesting why that didn't really happen in Europe. Now, I think Yaakov's still thinking that this counter is the opposite of what you'd expect, right?
Right. I mean,
because
if it can happen during the week also, then it's easier to do it as right? You do it every day. Maybe there's no gzirah. It needs to happen on Shabbat.
Right. So I think that's an interesting point because Rav Ovadia definitely takes the.
Can you repeat things when people?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Who are in present, that is before you, say something because it doesn't come.
No, you're right. Beseder Gamor, you're right. And here you're right to reprimand because it's your son. So so Yaakov
I couldn't even tell.
Wow, that's now we're in trouble. Now I know we're in trouble. So Yaakov proposed two options of how to read this Taz. Presumably the Taz seems strange. In other words, you'd think that something that could happen anytime and happens to happen on Shabbat, then you could earn the money. But something that could only ever happen on Shabbat, then that would be a bigger problem, no? So Yaakov says, well, one option is to say what Rav Ovadia says. You didn't read Rav Ovadia, right? skip over to Rav Ovadia. נראה כוונת התז שלצורך מצווה של השבת עצמו לא אסור ליטול שכר שבת. אבל לצורך מצווה של שמירת פרה ותינוק שאינם שייכים לגוף השבת, לא יתירו ליטול שכר שבת. So Rav Ovadia is really basing his psak and basing the Taz on the ultimate goal that we want to achieve. And the point is this: we have to allow mitzvot to happen on Shabbat. Right? We have to allow mitzvot to happen on Shabbat. Now, question: how do we do that? Well, if you have to watch the cow all week long, the paradum all week long, so watch it all week long, and then you could subsume the Shabbos earning in the other earnings. So I don't need to create anything new for that. On the other hand, if I have someone who's only going to be working on Shabbat because there's nothing else for him to do during the week in that context, then I say, well, I need the result of this person working on Shabbat, so I have to pay him. So this is very, I'd say, this is very Rav Ovadia in the sense that it's not a lumdish way of learning the Taz, as it were. It's more of a almost like utilitarian,
Consequentialist.
Consequentialist. I guess it's a better word.
It's what he said before. You don't care about what happens on Shabbat.
I'm not sure I understand what you meant.
You said before that you don't care about any of the preparation.
Right. Glenn's pointing out in the previous, very, very good. Impressed. Last week, it's impressive. It's impressive connection. Glenn is pointing out what we learned last week, that Rav Ovadia said there, all the preparation you did during the week isn't really relevant, right? You're working with what you work. If you have work that's done all week long, so that's one thing. If you had to prepare during the week, you worked on Shabbat. So don't tell me, well, I had to prepare the shiur before Shabbat. I had to edit the pages, whatever it is. I to prepare the parsha. I don't care about any of that. When you worked on Shabbat, right? Rav Ovadia here is very consequentialist. Is that the way it would be said? He's saying, what is my end goal? My end goal is that people will be able to do the mitzvot on Shabbat. If I have a way of subsuming it, fine. If not, it's not. So not. There's no lumdus behind this, right? There's no, right? I think Yaakov proposed maybe to say slightly differently, similar idea, but slightly differently, to say that Chazal, how would you say? Just I'm trying to think of, is it really different? It's the same thing ultimately. Okay. Right. Okay. So yeah, that's fine. You're in good company. Rav Ovadia and the Taz. All right. Next.
So why would there be Enos Roeh Siman Bracha?
Oh, very good. Good question. Right. We're going to get back to that soon, but there is an important point here, which is, it seems to be that we say what we want, and again, if I want to say what I'm looking at is the end goal, my end goal of saying to someone, well, I need your mitzvah to be done. Now, just so you know, you'll have no bracha in this mitzvah. I don't know, would that work? Would that fly? If I say to someone, no, you could earn the money on Shabbat because I need you to earn the money on Shabbat, otherwise you can't have a shiur. I say, okay, so good, so I'll be making good money. He was like, no, it's not going to be good money. Maybe you'll be making a handful of cash, but it's not going to be good money in the sense that you'll have any bracha from this. That is a bit of a problem. It does imply that we still have, that the schar Shabbat is still bothering us even so, right? You still want to subsume it in other money, right? In order to have a bracha in it, right? So I agree with Rav Ira's point. It's a problem. Now, so as we said, Rav Ovadia took this into the direction of what's my end goal. That's Rav Ovadia. The Beit Yosef goes on a very long lamdas here. We won't read the whole thing. The Beit Yosef, what he does is, I'll just say in terms of the category of what he tries to do. What he does is he says, when you're making money for a mitzvah, it's less. What he does is this. First, let's explain why it's not as bad. It's not fully in the realm of the Isur. And then we say, once I say that, then for mitzvah will allow it. It's just, right, Rav Ovadia was very focused on what's the end goal. And then he says, I don't care about anything else. I just care about getting the result. I need the result of people who do the mitzvot on Shabbat. They need to get paid for them, otherwise they won't do them. Fine, that's Rav Ovadia. The Beit Yosef takes a different approach and says, we're going to explain why in all these cases, it's not really within the world of Schar Shabbat, not fully within the world of Schar Shabbat, And then if we're talking about something else, we'd answer it anyway, but because it's a mitzvah, we're matir. And he does this in an astonishingly surprising way. He says, the whole Isur of Schar Shabbat is banter on Shabbat. Barter on Shabbat. Yeah, that makes more sense, right? Yeah. Banter on Shabbat is a different sugya we learned already about. Why? Right. We also discussed, are you allowed to just have banter? Barter on Shabbat, right? In other words, to work out the details of how you're going to work out the details. That's what's asur on Shabbat. Right? Scholi po'alim, all those things. That's the Isur of Schar Shabbat. Schar Shabbat is deciding what the Sachar of Shabbat is going to be. Anything that isn't that, or the working and earning on Shabbat is not Isur of Schar Shabbat, it's only Michzik is Schar Shabbat. Because you might have to go into bartering. It's very surprising because it flips the whole sugya. I know, and it flips the whole sugya on its head. That's what he says. Unbelievable, right? Let's just find where he says this. Here, you see, I'll just start much from 4 lines from the end. Page 11. Now you went back to 11. 4 lines from the end of the Beit Yosef. In the middle of the line, v'tamek de parishit. There's no hiring and no barter happening on Shabbat itself. Meaning the whole Isur of Schar Shabbat is only having the hiring or the bartering on Shabbat. That's Isur of Schar Shabbat. Earning money after Shabbat for work you did on Shabbat is not within the Isur of Schar Shabbat. And once you say that, then you can say, well, for a mitzvah, we'll make el because it's only mitzvah. So, again, Rav Ovadia went on the unlumdish, right, consequentialist direction, right? The goal is what's going to justify the means, as it were. That's Rav Ovadia's approach. The Beit Yosef's approach is take the whole thing one madrega less. Say the whole thing is a bit less usher than what we thought. And then for a mitzvah, you'll matir. I'll just read this to the end. You should never be working on Shabbat, and you might have to start arguing about the money, etc. So we don't go there. So don't work on Shabbat. So what? כלומר, כיוון דאין איסור בדבר כלל, אין איסור is not any isur for schar mitzvah. I pointed out before that the wording there is a bit strange. This sentence structure, there's something a bit weird about it if it just means you're allowed to earn money for mitzvot on Shabbat. So the Beit Yosef, that's what he's saying. He says there's no isur at all. And because it's a mitzvah, don't start creating chumras. That's the Beit Yosef's read, an astonishing read, and I'd say, like, my goodness, how can you say such a thing? Except what's even more surprising than that is the Bach, who's very quick to bash the Beit Yosef when he disagrees. Right, so Beit Yosef avim ma shekatav Mordechai, afa bi shechazanim shelokchim schar Shabbat, ekshar ben Yishmor, etc. Lekaman, you see at the middle of the second line here. Lekaman sevan taf kuf pehei katav Beit Yosef be'aruka. That's the long bit I gave you before. Betuvtam demutar v'hachino galma lehakel. Astonishing. The Bach says, yeah, Beit Yosef, good job. That is surprising in itself, but specifically here, we were like, you just turned over the whole sugya, right? Like this is against everything we the whole way we thought about the sugya, and the Bach's like, yeah, good job. It's just right to be surprised, right? Oh. And then so we had again Rav Ovadia, that's based on the Rav Ovadia's way of dealing with this is talking about the consequence, talking about the end goal, right? What's the result? The result I'm interested in, right? Beit Yosef is taking the whole thing to say it's not as chomer as you thought, and therefore we could make it for a mitzvah. And then there's Reb Chaim. And I don't remember why Reb Chaim is not on the page, because Reb Chaim is my favorite one here, because he's the Lamdish one. We're looking for the Lamdish, right? So Reb Chaim says like this. Reb Chaim says, what is the definition of Schar Shabbat? The definition of schar Shabbat, the definition of the isur of schar Shabbat is defined based on Reb Chaim as follows. Fantastic definition. He says like this: if you're a waiter on Shabbat, is that asur? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a waiter every Shabbat, right? I do wash dishes and that, right? Every Shabbat, right? I worry about warming up the food and bringing it out and about washing it, all right? Every Shabbat. So I'm allowed to do that. Why? Right.
You're not assuming any compensation for that.
Oh, that's the most basic, because I'm not getting compensated for it, right? As long as I get no compensation, I don't get any compensation for it, that's not a problem, right? Says Reb Chaim, that's the point. When you earn money for work, that work is defined as a melacha. Now, it sounds very Reb Chaim-ish, right? Like, okay, there's a brisker way of looking at it, right? The Lomdish definition of the Isur is to work on Shabbat. In other words, the work for which you earn is considered a melacha. Shabbat maybe, but so the work for which you earn is considered a melacha. Now, you might say that sounds very brisker, which is fine because it's Reb Chaim, but I think it also does touch an intuitive aspect of the whole thing. Because if you ask your non-religious, for your secular friends, your non-religious friends, right? You're not to work on Shabbos. How do you understand this? I think that's the way they would define any Isur Melacha on Shabbat. Now then you tell them, no, even writing 2 letters just right over here is much worse than everything you're talking about of being, right? Right? Intuitively, when you say not to work on, right, Shabbat is a day of rest, what it means is don't do work for which you earn money, right? That's the first and foremost. Now, again, of course, there's Avot Melacha. Of course, we have all the halacha. I'm not putting any of that aside. I'm just saying this idea in Reb Chaim is not something it sounds, initially, I think when I said it, it sounded very brisker. Like, we'll define the melacha you do as a melacha that's also on Shabbos if you earn money for it. But when you think about it more deeply, I think that it actually does touch an intuitive aspect of the way we think about Shabbat. Now, Reb Chaim explains a few things based on this idea. And then he says, and then Isser Zalman Meltzer says, there's one more thing Reb Chaim forgot to mention, which is so obvious that he said he thinks it's so obvious Reb Chaim didn't even bother mentioning it. And that's the following. What's the nafkamina we want to talk about right now? Schar mitzvah. Doing a mitzvah will never be in Asur Melacha on Shabbos. It just doesn't work like that. So doing the mitzvah could never be defined as something that's Asur, as a Melacha that's Asur on Shabbos. So that's why he explains the sentence here. Rabbi Shmuel says, "Ein isur dan notnim lo sachar lekayem mitzvah." In other words, you can't define that as a schar, you can't define that as a asur melacha on Shabbos. It doesn't fit. You can't. The sentence doesn't work.
Of the mitzvah for Shabbos, and then it's okay.
Right, as long as you could justify that it's a mitzvah.
Childcare.
Oh, so then you start going into the balagan of what is and what isn't, right? What is and what isn't. It's fair enough. Fair enough.
It doesn't really sound like it will work. Like a rabbi, you can't tell me that he's not working on Shabbat because
Just doing a mitzvah, so it's all okay.
No, the fact that it's okay, again, Yaakov's saying like this, and I'm repeating also for the Zoom people. Yaakov's saying like this. You could argue, halachically, it's not a problem because he's doing a mitzvah. Fine, fair enough. But you can't argue he's not working. You can't, the Reb Chaim doesn't really fit those cases. In other words,
The Reb Chaim fits this way in saying that since you're doing a mitzvah on Shabbat, you don't have to worry about the aspect of
right. You can't. But again, am I working right now? When I get home now, am I going to say I got back from work, or am I going to say I got back from teaching Torah? I mean, they're both true, but this is work. Sorry, I mean, it's right. It's yes, for sure. But no, but right. There's still this. ultimately, right, as much as we enjoy it, as much as we're the rabbi's drasha and all these things, as much as we, in the end, when you're doing that work, you're working, you're at work, you're doing the work. It's work. It's hard to find a way around that.
It's almost like it's like reverse of that. When all you do the entire week, month is be a professional Jew.
Right.
So then
Be a professional Jew. I understand what you meant. Yeah.
So then you're working on Shabbat, and
Right.
It's different than like a specific act. Like, okay, I will blow shofar.
Right. Now I see. Very fair point. Right. Someone who blows shofar one time, he's being hired for that. Someone who's a chazan this once, right, this one day, etc. Then we can see how I'm being a chazan. I mean, right. Usually I'm an accountant, but today I'm being a chazan or whatever, right? Or even if he's a singer and today's a chazan, etc. But usually he's, does shows. He's not doing a mitzvah perpetually, right? He's not. That's not his professional, right, designation. So it's a fair point. That would be a problem in Reb Chaim. Just want to repeat the three methods of how to approach this, right? Rav Ovadia's consequential, right? What is my end goal? The Beit Yosef's, let's make it one darga less, and then for mitzvah you could matir, and the Reb Chaim that wants to take it to a very lumdish place, right? Let's quickly see the psak. The Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Taf Kuf Pei. I went back to page 12 now. הנוטל שכר לתקוע שופר בראש השנה, או כדי להתפלל או לתרגם בשבתות וימים טובים, אינו רואה מאותו שכר סימן ברכה. Right, based on the same Gemara that said that the Meturgeman doesn't get siman bracha. You're allowed to earn the money, but you won't have a bracha from it. Right? That's the Meturgeman. It says the same for someone who blows shofar, etc. The Magen Avraham, right, explains aval isur aleika kevan tzorach mitzvahu, as we said. But the Pri Chadash disagrees. Says the Pri Chadash ketov Magen Avraham de isur aleika kevan tzorach mitzvahi veleita delay b'siman shin vav satam le'esor. So Pri Chadash says, no, it actually is, the mitzvah doesn't justify the heter, right, based on the Rima. But the Tzitz Eliezer disagrees. And the Tzitz and Rav Ovadia, they both disagree and say that that's mutar. I'm just wondering how much to read here. Let's skip over to Rav Ovadia. מסקנת דינא דאש להתיר לחזנים ודרשנים ליטול שכר על מה שמתפללים ודורשים מדי שבת בשבתו, אין בזה שום איסור משום שכר שבת, שהוא צורך מצווה, ומותר להם לקבל שכר שבת. Remember last week, Glenn, you pointed out, right? Did I read too fast? Yeah. I didn't mean that. I meant it's also true, but that the Rav Ovadia doesn't subsume it who work during the week. I forgot how much of a troublemaker you are. גם שכירי הכשרות שבבתי מלון, מסעדות, מותר להם לקבל שכר שבת, שהוא גם כן צורך מצווה, להציל רבים ממכשול ועוון. מכלן של דברים למדנו, גם לתוקים שופר בראש השנה, לקובעי ישיבות ושיעורים מדי שבת בשבתו, רשאים לקבל שכר על זה כיוון שהוא צורך מצווה. עובדיה, says the שמירת שבת כהלכתה. Just gonna skip over to that, page 13. גם לדעת המקילין, אין בקבלת תשלום תמורת חזנות ותקיעת שופר משום סימן ברכה. That's a problem. טוב יעשה עוסקים בכגון זה, בגון דע, שיתנו עם החזן או בעל התוקע, שיקבלו את שכרם דווקא בהבלעה, עדיין שהחזן יעבור לפני התיבה, גם בימות החול. As we said, it might be that if you're a chazan, they might pay you to not be a chazan בימות החול. Just saying. And he continues, רופא או אחות הנקראים להעניק טיפול רפואי בשבת, מותר להם לדרוש שכר לעזרה רפואית שהעניקו בשבת. As we said, right, you have to be concerned. So first of all, you might want to be concerned about the issue of bracha, right? In other words, am I allowed to be paid for the shiur I'm giving on Shabbat? Yes, but if I want to see bracha in it, I better subsume it in other money. That's one thing. The other thing, when it comes to doctors and nurses, they were far more mekel because of the Mari Bruna. Mari Bruna says, "Mishum sakana dilma yada delo leitav lasachar lo atya or mitzael b'mitzvah." So based on this Mari Bruna could be another solution to also to guards and to policemen and to doctors and right. In other words, if they don't get the reason, and this goes back to what Dr. Barlowitz said earlier, the real reason we give all these people more money on Shabbat is because otherwise we'll be stuck. If you get the same, if you earn the same, if you're a resident and you're earning the same thing on Shabbat and on the rest of the week, you'll only go on Shabbat when you're forced to. And we don't want that world. We want them to say, good, go on Shabbat. It's just an aspect where it's worth it, right?
They'll have to tell people to go back home.
Right, correct. Same idea. Yes.
Then they never would.
Yes. So this goes back. Yaakov hinted at this, and I kind of said that maybe you more than hinted, but I kind of said we'll get to that later on. Mari Bruna said it before him. Sorry. This idea that if you won't have people, if you don't have the policemen, if you don't have the guards, if you don't have the security guards or whatever it is, right? You don't have the doctors, they won't come. They won't come on Shabbat, and we need that. They won't come, and then the world will be a more dangerous place. And that's why we do allow not only to get the money on Shabbat, but also to get the added bonus on Shabbat. I think that's something that we have to allow for all of those professions, at least, right? All of those things, they're critical. Otherwise, you can't run a country, you can't run a society if you don't have that. So I think it's another way of justifying getting the bonus on those times.